Welcome, everyone. It's good to be back with you after 2 weeks of holidays, and I must admit I feel just a little bit lazy this morning because, you see, I don't have to preach. I didn't have to write the service this week. All I had to do was put together what's probably a far too long set of community prayers. So there you go. It's good to be with you. I know that we're connected electronically, one with each other, and yet I have you here in front of me because there you are. Pictures on the pews are all there. And we also wish to thank the many people that make this service come together. I know that it seems odd just to see one face, but there are many. So, for example, David Hamilton, as usual, on the bench leading us musically. Rod Coates and Liz Coates, who are providing extra voices so you don't have to just listen to me sing, thank God. But we're very appreciative of your being here to help us with that, and also with the final hymn, which we've never sung before. The slide presentation put together by Sarah McKenzie at home, Jim and Judy Zarubik, who are faithfully once more up in the balcony, and as the temperatures cool, are very grateful that it's not the furnace it usually is during the summer up there. We don't have a custodian right now. We're looking to hire, and you may have noticed that in the announcements that were scrolling while David was playing the prelude. John Phillips and Liz Dillman, who take care of our finances, both those that need to be paid and the money coming in. And a big thank you to Liz Dillman, who put this worship service together. She was to have been here, except that she has either a very bad cold or the flu, not COVID. She's been tested, and that, she says, was a terrible experience, but nevertheless. We have Tom Franklin with us, which you will see later. He is our guest speaker, who is from the representing the Chalmers Community Garden Project. And we are so glad to have you here, Tom. I know they can't see that you're here, but I can see that you're here, and they will see you when you come up here to speak. So, Tom, it's great to have you with us. And Krista Ritchie, who also happens to be part of that project and who is helping to lead worship this morning. Thank you to all that made this come together. And as the church has done in this location for so many years, we use the screens a lot, so the red print and bold is for me to lead or others who are leading, and the black print and bold is for everyone to read together. So let's practice that as we acknowledge the territory on which we are privileged to gather in worship. Jesus calls us into the world to love one another as we are loved by God.
As we came to this land, First Nations peoples welcomed us, sustained us, and taught us.
We did not
hear them when they shared their vision.
In our zeal to tell them the good news of Jesus Christ, we were closed to the value of their spirituality.
We confused Western ways and culture with the depth, breadth, length, and height of the gospel of Christ. We imposed our civilization as a condition of accepting the gospel.
As a result, the image of the Creator in us is twisted, blurred, and we are not what we are meant by God to be.
In our journey towards reconciliation, we acknowledge this day that we gather for worship on the traditional territories of the Saugeen Ojibwe and the other indigenous peoples who preceded them, the original nations of this land. And we acknowledge with respect their history, their spirituality, and their culture.
There are some announcements that I'd like to highlight for you this morning. First of all, they arrived 10 days ago. I know we didn't tell you because we didn't want them to be overwhelmed by curiosity, and even though they were all well-wishers, but for 7 years since they fled the civil war in Syria, they've been living in Lebanon for 6 years, although Mohammed, the father, has been working in Algeria for the last 3 years, which is about the distance from Lebanon as Vancouver is from us here. And it's finally, they've all finally arrived except for Mohammed, and they're carefully observing quarantine in the house that we have provided for them. As well, we would love for you to continue to donate towards that. Here's the reality. If you mark any donations as refugee family, even though we would now like to call them newcomers, that money will be directed to the Refugee Steering Committee. The biggest need is for things like, oh, I don't know, regular dental checkups, which we all want to accomplish for them before the end of the calendar year. You don't get that when you're in a refugee camp, and OHIP does not cover that. Secondly, we want to make sure that they get their optical issues taken care of. I have no idea how many of them need glasses, and they may not know yet themselves, because again, that's not something they get when you're in a refugee camp. And there's a lot of other stuff that will happen over time that we will discover as we get to know them better and they get to know us. The National UCW Invitation. Now, I want to make this clear because I was a little confused when I read it first. The United Church women are invited to join a national gathering on October the 2nd. So that is on the 2nd from 1 to 3, and you'll see the invitation there, and they need to know by the 23rd, this Wednesday, in order to get you in on the Zoom call. Secondly, there is another gathering, and that is for a virtual UCW gathering, and this is on Saturday, October the 3rd, and it is a virtual worship at 10 o'clock in the morning. There will be more details announced about that as we get to know them, but just mark those in your calendar if that's something that would interest you. We also, today is the Terry Fox Run, and I know that lots of places across the country this is happening virtually, but we also have Emily Perry. Now, if she's watching this right now, she's probably putting her head in her hands and going, Gord, you weren't supposed to say anything. But she doesn't like to trumpet what she does every year. Because she can't run or walk the Terry Fox Run, I mean, she would say that, yeah, I can walk down the street and back, but that's about it. She shaves her head, not all the way to the skin, but pretty close, every year to support cancer research. If you would like to support her in that endeavor, give her a shout. She would be very happy to hear you. Or if you go to the Terry Fox Run website and donate, make sure you donate to Emily Perry and let her know. Recent services like this one, which are broadcast on Rogers Cable Channel 6 a week later. So if you're seeing this on TV, you're seeing this on the 27th of September, instead of this was filmed and recorded on the 20th of September. We also have our YouTube channel. Just type in the search engine Kincardine United Church Ontario, and boop, up comes our stuff, and you can access it that way. And Rogers also has a website that you don't need cable TV to access the services. And finally, there are fireside chats, and they will be restarting this Tuesday. A little humor, as apparently Judy said last week, a little too much humor. Reflection, some music, a prayer, and a blessing. So we would invite you to join us there. As the church has done for millennia, I say to you, may the peace of Christ be with you all.
And also with you.
And I know this feels uncomfortable, but if you're all alone, you can say it to the people in your hearts. If you have someone else there sitting on the couch beside you, sipping whatever beverage you've chosen, feel free to share that greeting with each other. Go ahead. Peace. As we have shared the peace of Christ, and the peace of Christ unites us all as one, let us prepare ourselves to acknowledge God's ever-presence amongst us, within us, around us, and strengthening us as we prepare for worship. This is the light of Christ. It shines within us, sometimes despite us, but it is the promise of hope to a world that aches and yearns for more. May this be our guiding light as we walk the way of Jesus. Let's join together in the call to worship that you'll find on your screens. Friends, we gather as those who are challenged to be the church in today's world.
As a grateful people, we are called to celebrate God's presence, to live with respect in creation, to love and serve others, to seek justice and resist evil, to proclaim Jesus crucified and risen, our judge and our hope.
We offer our worship to God, trusting that we will become the church God dreams we can be. Let's join together in the first hymn, It Only Takes a Spark. You'll find the words scrolling on your screens. Let's join together in the opening prayer that was written by Christine Sign and posted on her website, GodSpace. God, we thank you for your harvest, which feeds us so many times each day.
We are nourished with your forgiveness and hope. We are sustained with your strength and patience.
We are filled with your grace and compassion, God. We thank you for feeding us with a harvest of plenty.
We are restored through your generosity and healing. We are replenished with your abundance and joy.
We are reminded of your selfless abandon, God.
We thank you for feeding us with the bread of heaven. Your gift of Christ sustains our lives.
His presence restores the promise of your love. His life fills our hearts with your everlasting light, God.
We thank you, too, for filling us with the water of life. May we drink deeply that our thirst may be quenched. May your river continue to flow over us, in us, through us, and out into the world you love.
Now, so often in the world, we don't feel worthy. We don't feel that we can follow where Jesus leads. We don't have the right stuff. God's promise is that God is with us every day. We are never alone. Even when we turn a blind eye on others and on God, nothing we do or don't do can separate us from God's love. God loves us always. Thanks be to God. In the assurance of that knowledge that God is ever present with us and loves us unconditionally, let's join together in a prayer of confession. Gracious and loving God, there are days when we ignore the lost among us.
Forgive us.
There are days when we ignore those suffering among us.
Forgive us.
There are days when we ignore the homeless among us.
Forgive us.
There are days when we ignore the hungry among us.
Forgive us.
There are days when we ignore the gifts you have given us.
Forgive us.
There are days when we ignore you.
Forgive us.
Amen. Let's join together in singing the second hymn, For the Fruit of All Creation, and the words will come to you shortly.
Our first scripture reading this morning is Matthew chapter 22, verses 34 to 40, found on page 25 in the New Testament. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Our second reading is found in John chapter 6, verses 1 to 14, page 97 in the New Testament. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for all these people to eat?" He said this as a test to him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they all sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." It's now my pleasure to welcome Tom Franklin, our guest speaker today. Tom farms on the North Line together with his wife Christine and his daughters Katie, Jenna, and Abby. They produce pasture-raised beef, and they're always adding something to their menagerie, like chickens or ducks, depending on the year. This year, their eldest, Katie, started a market garden, and the whole family jumped on board. It's called Franklin Produce. In addition to farming, Tom teaches science at Saugeen District Secondary School, and as a hobby runs a webpage called People, Nature, Food. The Franklins attend Chalmers Community Church, and today we will hear about their community garden project. Food grown at Chalmers is harvested and distributed to local area food banks. The gardens are now in their 3rd season. I'd like to welcome Tom as he takes us through how this project evolved and where it is headed in the coming seasons.
Right on. Thanks, Gord. Very enthusiastic. Thanks, Krista, for that introduction. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Gord, for having me here today. And that's also true. Thanks to the entire congregation for making time in your day to share a little bit about food in our community. And I'm looking right now at a collage of pictures that Krista put together. And it's a really nice, looking at that, it's a really nice introduction to what we're trying to accomplish at Chalmers Community Garden. And Judy, could you hit the first slide there for me? Great. Now, I kind of had a feeling that not too many people would know where Chalmers Church is located. So this is a sign that you might see. Head north on 21, get to the 7th concession, and you see this little sign, and there's an arrow, go that way. Drive about 5 minutes, and when you feel like you're completely in the middle of nowhere, look to your left, you've arrived, and you'll see this building. So this is the church that stood on that property for quite some time. And it was here that a community barbecue was hosted, I guess just about 3 years ago. And that's an annual thing that the church puts together where community members, church members, what have you, whoever, show up, have a big barbecue, lots of food, talk, and so on. Kind of a summertime thing. So I arrived and I saw Philip Craig. And Philip's says to me, you know, what's going on? And he knows that I listen to podcasts quite a bit. Listen to any new podcasts, you know, what are you doing? And I told him, yeah, actually, I've been listening to a podcast that's about food security. And it really hit home with me. And food security, right off the hop, is kind of best understood if you were to answer this question. Did you ever wake up in the morning and you wondered what you would eat that day, or if you would eat that day? And you know, in that, you see that there are so many people in our communities that might not know where their next food was coming from. And this podcast was centered on that. In addition, it was church-based. So this church in Baltimore, Maryland, was heavily involved in producing food for the community, for people in need, and trying to address food security there. And Philip Craig's super enthusiastic. He said to me, oh, great, we should do that. And I sort of thought to myself, great, you know, that's just what I need is another project, right? and I said, really, like, where would we do that? And on just to the east of this slide, so you see the church itself, but just to the east is a field the size of a ball diamond. And Philip pointed over there. And so question and answer, that's where it could be located. And, you know, one thing led to another. We got busy and got some organization in place and presented it to the church. Philip asked the congregation, he said, do you think we could do this? And they're, you know, okay, you know, some agreement. He said, do we have the experience? And so the church, being a rural community, has a lot of, well, it's mostly country people. So we took a poll of those in attendance that day, and there were not just 1,000 years of farming experience, but there were thousands of years of farming experience sitting in the pews that day. And so clearly we had the resources in land, and we had the knowledge in the congregation. And so it was time to get things going. And so we started off and took steps in that direction. Judy, could I have the next? Now, just before I talk a little bit more about the church garden itself, I wanted to speak about food security and how it exists in communities in Ontario. On this slide, you see next grocery store, 15 kilometers, and you see a person walking along the side of the highway. Now, this makes you wonder, why would a grocery store be located so far away, and why would this person be walking? As I understand it, there exist in our communities food deserts. And a food desert is created this way. A city matures and land prices become more and more valuable. And with grocery stores sitting on very valuable property, the grocery stores soon get converted to high-rise condos and things like that. And that leaves anyone who lives in the area out of luck if they're hoping to go to a grocery store and buy food. And so, depending on your resources, that's no big deal. Jump in your car and go shop for your groceries. But if you don't have those resources, things are a little bit different. Judy? You end up doing the best you can with the time you've got. And that might be fast food. That's clearly one of the options for so many people in our communities. Judy? Another option is convenience store food and gas station food. So some are raised and fed, whatever can be bought at a convenience store. Judy? Now, we all know, and you look at this slide, that we are what we eat. And in fact, it goes a little bit further if you think about the soil. We are what our food eats, which is a little weird. It goes another step. Now, the caption with this article from the news was 1 in 5 deaths can be prevented your diet. And you reflect back on food deserts and food security, and you really have if you connect the dots, there's a straight line between what we eat and the health of individuals and everyone in a community. Judy, thank you. Now, lately I've been thinking about what effect the pandemic has had on hunger and the availability of food. I did I'm a member of a Grow Food Toronto Facebook site, and I asked for some resources, and someone sent me this. It's a description of changes that have happened in demand for food. And at the bottom, we could read it later, but at the bottom you see that the Yonge Street Mission, which is pretty much a famous uh, food bank in Toronto, has seen their demand grow from 2,000 to 8,000 individuals per month. So that's a massive change in demand, and it was already great. Judy? Thank you. Okay, so here's what we had the first year. We had 7 garden beds, 6 feet wide, 75 feet long, and we had a lot of success. For a first year garden, really good. It was great. And you can see in the foreground garlic and cabbage and broccoli and onions and so on. Now, these beds were just beautifully plowed. In our church community, we had Tom Evans, who is the Canadian champion plowman. So that's not something that every congregation has as a resource, but they were like dead straight, beautiful garden beds. And there's another part that slides in. There it is. Now, what the result is lots of food, lots of work to be done, and a real community effort in harvesting that food. Now, a couple of points about what you see there. Some people in the photo are church members. Some people are community members, friends, family, and so on. In fact, this is how I first met Krista, right? She was on board and jumped in and helped out. We would do, like for example, we would harvest and take care of, say it was approximately 200 pounds of fresh garlic in just over an hour. And that's with lots of people and lots of energy and everyone prepared to just get at it and go. So lots of success there. Here are the reasons why I enjoy being part of the Chalmers Community Garden. One is it's outside. I really enjoy that. The second thing is it's very social. Like it's a lot of fun. Third, it's physical, and I like that. So some hard work, and you can kind of work as hard as you want, right? And another is that it's rewarding. You can't help but feel good about what your hands have done when you're finished a session of work like that. And finally, and this goes without saying, it's necessary. There are hungry people and we can do something about that. Okay, Judy? All right, now you can see that with the pandemic, things have changed a little bit. This year, it wasn't until May 12th that we could even get at the garden. And when we did, we had to be in a small group. So we were already late, weeds had set in. And it was just, this is a typical example of Krista sorting through some garlic for seed. But the challenges of the pandemic in a garden that's in its entire organization is social, were really tough to overcome. Judy? And here's a second example. This was actually in May. You can see the snow falling. This is a small group of us planting onions at 6-inch spacing, right? So just a tough job. A large group could have fun doing that in half an hour, 20 minutes. That was a good, tough job to do that day, Judy, but it pays off. So this is a shot from my drive shed. These onions are drying. So that's the result of the work that was done. And there's lots of food there that can head to hungry people. Now, we thought we had a really good plan. As it turns out, we had 3 of those 75-foot beds in squash. And what could be better than that, right? Plant the seed, walk away, come back, harvest squash. Easy as that. But this little guy, this is a cucumber beetle, had something else in mind and wreaked havoc on the squash plants and the cucumber all summer long. And so we eventually plowed under those beds. There was nothing else that we could do. And Krista, being resourceful, she popped in probably 50 pepper plants late. And, you know, if you just look on the bright side of things, we ended up with a pretty good basket of peppers, at least, right? And so there's value in that. Now, carrots were part of the plan, and I think we planted maybe, say, 3,000 carrot seeds, something like that. And there's still lots and lots of carrots out there, and they're just beautiful. The soil in that location is awesome. As an example, well, this was taken to the Port Elgin Food Bank a couple of weeks ago, and Krista's been taking food to the Kincardine Food Bank on a regular basis. But as an example, this week after work on Thursday night, I dug out 60 feet of carrots because the Salvation Army Food Bank in Port Elgin could use enough carrots for about 30 families. So dug them, washed them, and I dropped them off on my way to work on Friday morning. And success, right? So despite the pandemic, it is possible to get things done. I'll say that there was massive frustration with that little cucumber beetle and the intense heat this summer, but there were a lot of things that went extremely well. Next. Okay. This is a shot from last year. There's feed bags of food, and the location is the Huron County Food Hub. This is in Exeter, or based out of Exeter, and there's cold storage you can see in the back left, and there are the Food Hub has as resources 2 refrigerated trucks, and with a quick message, we can have anything that we grow picked up and taken back to this warehouse. And even if it's a lot of one type of food, that's no problem. And that's been the plan for the Chalmers Community Garden, to grow a lot of everything or of some things, harvest it, send it, and let somebody else who's an expert in that take care of distributing it. And so that's why last year in particular, the Food Hub was so great. As an example, we have sent last year and this year, say, just around 1,000 heads of garlic, fresh garlic. And if we had brought those and set them on the doorstep of the Kincardine Food Bank, there'd be a lot of questions like, what are we going to do with all this stuff? In fact, they'd be tired out probably carrying the bags of food around. So the Huron County Food Hub is a tremendous resource. What they did with the garlic both years is pick it up and then meet other trucks from other food hubs and share the food that each of them has in excess. So I was told that our garlic has been traded for fresh meat, which is just a relationship that couldn't be better. We've got lots of garlic. Here's a whole bunch of beef, and that came from Guelph. So some of this food that goes to the Huron County Food Hub makes its way to the the Teen Challenge Ranch in London, which is a facility for people who are, or men actually, who are challenged by addictions. But, you know, they enjoy the fruits of our labor. Now, that's a good system and it works really well, but it had to change this year, and it might have to change in the future. We'll try and grow lots of some things, and I'm not sure if I had a slide of garlic hanging from the wall as well. No, didn't have that one. What's that? Oh, that's it. Yeah. So we have already saved from what we grew 250 heads of garlic that we'll crack and plant for seed in the next week or so. So that'll be on a large scale still, and we'd like to get bigger as far as garlic goes because it seems to be expensive and a really good choice for the food banks. Now, other changes that might have to happen and sort of evolve that kind of make sense. Maybe we do have to go smaller scale with some things so that we can harvest weekly and supply the Kincardine Food Bank and also the Salvation Army Food Bank in Port Elgin. That might be the way to go. We're in a stage where we're looking for ideas. So Krista mentioned that, you know, maybe it would be a good idea to offer a bed to a group or a family. So they might take on, for example, growing the beets, right, for the year. And that sounds like a really good plan. Other things that I've been thinking about include an elder box. So if someone can't necessarily get out and get to the food bank or a grocery store to pick up their food, and they're challenged physically and they're aging, maybe a box of fresh produce could be brought to them on a regular basis. And that's called an elder box. And it's something that has been happening in Brooklyn for a number of years and I just happened to hear about that. That's a great idea. So what's going to happen in the future? Well, long term, we'll keep going. Right? If we have an opportunity despite the pandemic, we're going to lean right into it and continue. We've had some really good changes where we've improved the irrigation of the gardens. That's been fantastic. We're trying to do everything organic and without chemical inputs. So that continues despite the challenges. Would have been simple to take care of the cucumber beetle with a pesticide, but that's not part of the plan and it doesn't make healthy food. So some of the plans are long-term. Continue, what should we plant? How should we organize the garden? But some things are short-term. Here's one opportunity that I'd like to extend to anyone who's listening right now. On October 10th, which is the Saturday morning of the Thanksgiving weekend, we're organizing a work bee, and that would be to crack and plant garlic, which is break open cloves or heads and separate the garlic into individual cloves and plant them in the soil so that they'll be ready to go for the spring. So that's one thing we're looking forward to. So that's Saturday, October 10th at 9 o'clock. One nice thing about that is with the right number of volunteers, and outside right now we can have 25, I believe, we could get that work done in an hour and a quarter, something like that. And so as a volunteer commitment, it isn't an all-day job, right? It's go in, have fun, get it done, and off we go. We're all finished. And so I'm looking forward to that. The other things that we look forward to are kind of doing an improved job of taking care of weeds and some of those just basic challenges, because we don't grow anything without having to struggle with nature, you know, but weeds are one thing that are pretty tough. Krista messaged me the other day and she said, there's a rototiller available. And I thought, oh, that sounds great. Okay, so here's the number. Give them a call and see if that could work out. And I thought, okay, so right away called up and yeah, it was the Mowrys. It was Don and Stu Mowry, and I said, okay, well, what do you have? And she told me, and I said, well, does it matter when I pick it up? And she said, no, not really. And I said, okay, I'll be there within half an hour. So I went, picked it up, beautiful rototiller, ready to roll. Stu didn't know if it was going to run necessarily, but I took a friend of mine is a mechanic. He fixed it up, got it running, and it's gorgeous. So we're really thankful for that. That's going to make a huge improvement to keeping the weeds out of the edges of the garden next year. So that's the sort of thing that can happen unexpectedly that we really appreciate, and those sorts of things just kind of continue. Like this year with the pandemic, there's been one challenge after another, it seems like, but you know, depending on how you look at it, there's been one good thing after another as well. I kind of look long-term at things, and I remember saying one time to Krista, like, I know these cucumber beetles are just destroying these plants, but in the long view, our goal is to make a garden system that will be sustainable for decades, right? And with that in mind, the challenges of the pandemic or cucumber beetles or anything else are really just a flash in the pan, that's all. So things are looking good. We'll continue to produce good food for people in need. And I couldn't be happier to speak with you today and share my experience with the Chalmers Community Garden. So thank you very much. Thanks, Gord.
Normally what I would like to have is Tom here beside me, but because, as Tom noted in his talk, that with the pandemic, we have some restrictions we need to follow. I know there are some of you who might be saying, well, how come you're not wearing masks? Because you're inside after all. We've made sure that we are at least 4 to 5 meters apart, so that way you can see what our lips are saying and therefore hear us. But I'd also like to say to Tom, thank you so much. They may not have been able to notice your body language. You know, from the camera, it's not quite the same, but there's a level of bubbling enthusiasm and optimism that Tom exudes. Krista does the same thing. But Tom, I wanted to thank you so much for this, for the mission and the ministry that you are providing, not just because it's Chalmers Community Church, but because it's an initiative that crosses all the lines and allows this community to make a difference in the world. You're right about food deserts. We have them in Kincardine, and exactly that. I can remember being in another location, and there were people who were on public social assistance who would go to the local Shoppers Drug Mart because one item was cheaper than they could get at the grocery store, and it was within walking distance, but everything else was extraordinarily expensive. And so there was one lady who would eat cat food because that's what she could afford.
We don't have a grocery store downtown.
We don't have a downtown grocery store here in Kincardine, no. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So if you live in the port, you got to drive. There's no other option or walk.
So what Tom is saying is that here in Kincardine, with no downtown grocery stores, if you live in the downtown area, which actually I do, even though it's nice to have Tim Hortons a block and a half away, nevertheless, there's a lot of people who cannot access food easily, which is why the Anglican Church just up the way, that's where the local food bank is, and that's to what the Chalmers Community Garden also contributes, as Tom noted, that Krista brings the food there. It is enormous. I have worked in food banks where the participants who come and utilize the services of the food bank, you should just see their eyes light up when there's something fresh, something that isn't canned or freeze-dried or hasn't been processed to death. This is organic. So Baron Ports, if you're watching, our organic farmer, this is the project you need to be helping with. Anyone else who wants to be part of this, there's a list in the announcements that we have about the stuff for which they're looking. If you wish to make a donation towards the Chalmers Community Garden, feel free to make that note specifically on the bottom of your check or in the e-transfer that you make or however else you wish to donate. And we will make sure the money gets to that project, which isn't just Chalmers Community Church, it is the community. And you've heard from what Tom said, the enormous interconnections, even across Southern Ontario in this area, that make an enormous difference to this world. Tom, I want to thank you so much for bringing this vision, this ministry, this light into the world. Thank you very much. Now let us join together in thanksgiving as we hear the anthem. Apparently, it was Amazing Grace that was sung in that way. But the other reality is, apparently, we didn't have all the correct words. So my apologies for that. Let's join together in prayer. Loving God, who created the bounty of the earth within which and by which we thrive, we thank you for the ways in which you nurture our living. When we gather to give thanks and to celebrate the life of Glenn Holmes, you provide the opportunity for us to strengthen the ways we grieve as one. When we find out that Rita Moran continues to heal from her foot surgery and that Dottie McClellan is recovering well from her knee replacement, we give thanks for the chance to celebrate the strengths of our healthcare system and to continue to work toward making it even better even as we lovingly support those of us healing at home. When we discover that Ellie Taylor is currently in hospital here in town, we give thanks for the ability to call her at the hospital, to love her on the phone. Now that our refugee family has safely arrived and is quarantined at home, we thank you for the generosity you have planted within each of us to share the bounty you have given us with them, to get to know them over the coming months, and to live your love in relationship with our newcomers. As we are alarmed by the rise in COVID-19 cases across the province, we give thanks for the continued well-being of our newly returned students, teachers, custodians, support staff, and educational assistants. Even in the midst of our worries, we offer prayers for those further marginalized because of lack of resources, because of distance learning, or because of difficulty adjusting. Hear our silent prayers of thanksgiving, we pray. Even as we give you thanks, Christ of new life and of hope, we pray for your promise of new life among us in our world. We open our hands and discover seeds of hope. We look at the soil of your promise, prepared for us by your rising, as we reach out to plant those seeds while working to nurture the soil of life. We consider those of us who are living with cancer, those of us living with heart and stroke diagnoses, those of us living with mental health realities, those of us living with depression and loneliness, all made even worse by this pandemic. We plant, therefore, seeds of hope for healing, for companionship, for joy enlivened by the Spirit. We witness the devastation of rampant fires in the United States and in Brazil, weeping at the wounding of creation's wonder, beauty, and living web of life. As we plant seeds of hope that we would continue to work toward effective strategies to deal with climate change, with the exploitation of creation's bounty, and with our need to consider the consequences of our actions for 7 generations. We feel weighed down by the mounting tragedies from the pandemic, the growing infections, the deaths, and the long-term effects of those recovering. As we plant seeds of hope that nations will work together to find a vaccine and ever better treatment regimens, all while caring for those denying the danger. Please hear our silent prayers as we plant these many seeds of hope. As the cup of our watering overflows with your grace, O God, we water these seeds of hope, anticipating your harvest of love, of community, and of healing. Our hope and our communion with you we affirm as we share the words Jesus gave us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So many of you donate to the ministry and the mission of this particular church, which goes across the world, whether it's through the mission and service or whether it is through our local projects, or whether it's through things such as what Tom expressed to us about Chalmers Community Garden. However you give, whether it's by PAR, pre-authorized remittance sucked out of your account every 20th of the month, or whether it happens to be the envelopes that you mail into the church, or whether you do it by e-transfer or Canada Helps or by credit card, however you donate to the ministry and mission of this church, you do indeed make a difference. So as we give thanks to God for the ability to give of our bounty, let's join together in the prayer to bless the offering. God of justice and mercy,
the gifts we bring are so small in comparison to the vast needs in our world. Nowhere near enough to save the thousands who are dying of starvation or malnutrition, or even to meet the needs of the hungry and homeless in our town. Yet we come with open hands, bringing what we can, as you once multiplied the 5 loaves and 2 fish. Multiply these gifts as well, so that, once again, the hungry may receive all they need. Amen.
Let's join together in singing the final hymn, a hymn you've never sung before. So thanks to Rod and Liz who are willing to sing this one. I reassured David that I did know the music to this, and then I looked at it this morning and went, oh, it's not the hymn I thought it was. So I'm leaning heavily on these two back here. And for those of you who are singing along at home, we aren't going to hear whether you stumble the notes or not, so go for it. Make a fool of yourselves, because nobody's watching. Although you will be watching me make a fool of myself.
Sisters, let us walk together, sharing sadness, loss, and grief. We will move through pain to wholeness, brokenness transformed to peace. Brothers, let us work together, seeking justice, healing shame, filled with hope, imbued with courage. Every violence we will bear. People, let us love together, joining spirits, linking hands. We are God's unique creation, clothed with dignity we will stand.
So go, knowing that you have been gathered by the sender of love, upheld by the one who came in love, sent out in the power of love to plant seeds of hope, of bounty, of sharing, of community, of love. Go in peace. Amen.